Now, the Transport Workers Union has been speaking in Sydney. Let's take a listen to what Tony Sheldon's had to say.
Well, quite clearly this announcement today is Joe Hockey's wet dream. 5,000 people to lose their jobs, Australian family incomes to be reduced, work to be offshored overseas, and now the government using taxpayers' money, as they said they will, to underwrite the destroying of Australian jobs and seeing the flight of capital, Australian capital, being sent overseas for the failed Southeast Asian exercise with Jetstar. This is a company and a board of directors that have had a policy that's failed for the last 6 years, losses for most of those years, and the only thing that's gone up is their executive salaries of 82% since 2010. Look, I'd say this to all the reporters. Go back through your footage, have a look at all the AGMs that Alan Joyce has spoken at and the board, and they have talked about wage freeze after wage freeze, their own wage freezes. But they've gone up 82% whilst destroying hard-working Australians' jobs at the behest of Joe Hockey and this national government. Ready for questions.
Will you cooperate with Qantas in its desire to cut turnaround times in the domestic market from 45 minutes to 30 minutes?
Look, I think it defies logic to say you can do more work with less people and get a quicker turnaround time. But I've got to say this. The company should have a grand compact with its workforce. Joe Hockey should have a grand compact with its workforce of the company. What they've said at the end of a knife, that you turn around, have your jobs destroyed, rip the heart out of the company, and at the same time it's all the workers' fault. Well, quite clearly, the workforce for 2 decades have had a profitable airline until this board took control. Quite clearly, the workforce has always and will always be prepared to make this company successful. But the board has to have the same commitment, not just to their executive salaries, but they have to have a commitment to get rid of their loss-making exercise in Southeast Asia.
What do you say, Mr. Sheldon, to the proposal of a wages freeze?
Look, quite clearly, it's laughable to see the executives saying that they'll take no more wage increases. This is, I think, the third time since 2010, and they've paid themselves an 82% wage increase. But they've gone further than saying wage freezes. They've actually said 5,000 people losing their jobs in profitable parts of the business so they can prop up Hockey's dream of an Asian company for Qantas. And this is really a question about, does we want Qantas to be like Aeroflot with a kangaroo on its tail? We want Qantas to turn around and not be the national icon anymore? We've seen quite clearly the federal government has announced its desire to get rid of the Qantas Sale Act, to get rid of Australian jobs, rid of commitments within this country. That's a government working against the national interest. It's a government working against Australian families, and it's a government only bolstering the executives in this company.
Mr. Joyce was glowing of the Asian business earlier. You take the opposite tack.
Well, it's beyond amazement to see the CEO, the support of the board, get up and say that their Asian business is such a success, when they know, we know, the public knows, the financial institutions know, they're losing hundreds of millions of dollars. This is a failed exercise, and one that's been based on the policy of the board and followed through by Alan Joyce. I just remind everybody, when the equity funds came in and decided they were going to slice and dice and strip this company, ourselves and few others turned around and fought that. What Alan Joyce got the job, and rather than the other competitors for that position, was on the basis that he would implement the equity fund slicing and dicing this airline, and that's what Joe Hockey's bankrolling, using Australians' money to destroy Australian jobs.
What would you like the government to do?
Well, every government, and including this government, has a responsibility not to say we'll give you money if you export jobs overseas. We'll give you support on the basis that you protect the national interest. Joe Hockey has to stand up for the country, not just for the executives.
What about the job losses is obviously a shock, Tony. Is there justification for any job losses at Qantas?
Well, we've seen in the last 5 years, a quarter of the workforce has been made redundant. People haven't been replaced. The workforce is 22% more productive. We've said to the company, be engaged. Talk to the workforce. Stop downgrading this company, as you see, week after week from their own CEO, bagging his own company. That's not the recipe for success. It actually says, is this the recipe that the equity funds wanted to implement? And that's what he's been employed to do. Slice and dice the airline, and the only ones making money out of it is quite clearly the executives.
There's the chances of seeing a strike from the employees.
Look, I'd say this regarding the potential of strike action, and that is that there is an obligation before that's considered for the company and the government to sit down with the workforce and make sure this airline is saving jobs, not losing them. But if Joe Hockey's not prepared to do that, then industrial action is something that the workforce should be considering as a tool that it has a right to do. It has a right to withdraw its labour. The only places you can't do that is China, Vietnam. You get arrested there. In this country, if the government won't stand up for jobs and for the Australian icon, then we will.
Won't you get more jobs if there's a big, rich foreign investor prepared to put money into it?
Look, this is another fallacy. There is still 10% capacity for foreigners to invest in this company. With poor foreign investment, all we'll see is this company being sliced and diced quicker and the company being pulled apart. They'll be in here for a quick buck, not in the national interest. And what's particularly galling is that we've now got Joe Hockey and Warren Truss and this coalition government, the federal government, saying that they're going to get rid of the Qantas Sale Act that represents and protects our national interest. There are countries and companies and countries around the world that have airlines that are successful, profitable, by having an arrangement which properly pays their employees, properly engages with regard to productivity, and this company is failing to meet its obligations.
What about taking a 36% pay cut? It will cut his base salary by 1.2 million. Would you applaud that?
We've heard it all before. Go through your footage since 2010 and then look at the figures. An 82% increase in executive salaries. Do you seriously believe him?
Will the union resist either pay cuts or cuts in conditions? Because there's some discussion about getting rid of the existing EBAs and trying to slash the pay and conditions. Is that something that you should resist?
Well, quite clearly, the Joe Hockey and the coalition government have said we'll only support people that destroy a family's incomes in this country. And in this case, they've gone one step further. And we'll only support companies that not only slash family incomes in this country, but export jobs and capital overseas, using our capital, this country's capital, to do that. Well, that is quite clearly an attack on the Australian families. It's quite clearly an attack on the Australian way of life. And it's quite clearly an attack on job security in this country. And the government said, we'll bankroll it, just destroy everybody in your path.
Tony, I hear that you're on a Qantas flight this morning when you learned of this. How was that?
Well, I flew to Qantas in Melbourne yesterday, and again, talking to flight attendants and staff as I was going on that flight. I've never seen such despondency amongst the staff that I saw in the last 24 hours. This company, for a group of workers that love working for Qantas, but they despise the management that are trying to destroy it.
And Qantas will meet unions tomorrow. What will you tell management?
Well, management are going to tell us this decision's already been made. There's no consultation. This is part of the course for the last 6 years. It's a recipe for disaster. The company has proven it with their own failing in both income and investment. And, of course, we're going to hear the same rubbish tomorrow.